They flew me in on a chartered twin-engine prop that shouldn't have been flying that day. The storm warnings had been posted 2 hours prior to takeoff, but the man waiting in the hangar with the clipboard didn't blink when I brought it up. He just said, "It's a short flight," and handed me a pair of earmuffs. The pilot didn't speak to me. He didn't even look at me. The moment I stepped inside the plane, the interior was already vibrating as if the engine had been idling for hours. We took off without clearance, as far as I could tell. There was no tower communication, no gate procedure. The whole thing felt more like an extraction than an assignment. I'd worked for the government before, mostly in logistics for mid-tier energy operations, nothing beyond level 3 security, and never on a remote platform. The invitation, or rather, the directive, came via an envelope that arrived at my apartment under the door. No stamp, no courier. Just my name, underlined twice, and a boarding time. I should have walked away. I don't know why I didn't. The flight was short, just under 90 minutes. We flew over nothing but gray, unbroken water. The ocean below looked metallic, not just in color but in texture, flat and too reflective, as if it weren't water at all, but some vast sheet of shivering foil. The horizon didn't move. The light never changed. At some point I stopped looking. When the platform came into view, it didn't look like any rig I'd ever seen. For one, it wasn't lit properly. Offshore platforms operate under strict illumination standards. Every deck, every stairwell, every vented corridor should be visible from approach. This one was dim. It had lights, but they were inconsistent. Some pulsed softly like breathing. Others flickered as if powered by a failing generator. The structure itself was wrong, too angular and quiet. It was the quiet that struck me most. No hum of turbines, no thump of drills, just wind, and even that sounded distant. We landed on the helipad with a sharp jolt. No signal officer, no welcoming crew. The only thing waiting for me was a rusted trolley cart with a black folder strapped to it by a yellow band labeled Orientation, Clearance, SILT. I'd never heard of SILT. It wasn't on the internal clearance code list last time I checked, and I checked often. I picked up the folder. It was heavier than expected, like the paper inside had been soaked and dried several times. The moment I stepped off the helipad, the wind died. Not faded, died. As though I'd walked through some membrane. I paused, instinctively turning around, but the helicopter was already lifting off again. Rotors slicing through a soundless sky. No goodbye, just absence. The platform walkways were coated in a fine layer of ash-colored dust that didn't shift underfoot. My boots left no prints. The air smelled faintly of metal, and something else I couldn't place, like insulation or rotting plastic. I followed the red arrows painted on the railing, inductee pathway in block stencil, and descended 3 levels before I found another human being. He was standing behind a glass window, expressionless, wearing the same slate-blue overalls I'd been issued in my contract packet. He didn't wave or speak. He just pressed a button and the door slid open beside him. I stepped through and the door sealed shut behind me with a sound that felt disproportionately final. He handed me a keycard. No logo, no name. Just a barcode and a single word etched into the plastic. Residual. He told me my quarters were on Deck C, Corridor 19A. He did not offer to guide me. When I asked about the orientation session, he gestured at the folder still under my arm and said, "It's all in there. Do not photocopy it. Do not discuss it. Do not destroy it. You are being observed." His voice was smooth, mid-Atlantic accent, probably trained. I didn't catch his name, and he didn't offer it. Before I could ask another question, he had already turned and vanished behind a hydraulic door labeled Auxiliary Maintenance. I found my quarters eventually. The hallway was long, symmetrical, and artificially lit by overhead tubes that pulsed every 11 seconds. I counted. 11 seconds of dim white, then 3 seconds of flicker. Every single tube, without deviation. The effect was disorienting, like walking through a poorly synced dream. My cabin door was unlocked. Inside, a cot, a desk, a vent, and no window. The walls were that government off-white color, the kind that absorbs all warmth and makes everything feel slightly unwashed. I sat at the desk and opened the orientation folder. The first page was blank. The second page had a paragraph printed in gray ink. You have agreed to participate in Operation Salience. Your clearance level is residual. The information within this folder is encoded at cognitive latency thresholds and must be read in one sitting. You will not be able to recall these instructions in full after sleep. Compliance is measured. I turned the page. The third sheet had a map of the platform. except it didn't resemble the one I just walked through. The layout was different. Corridors extended below sea level into sections marked only by alphanumeric codes. There were levels marked 3 through a 7, none of which I'd seen or been told about. Every path leading to them was drawn in red ink and marked with the phrase, "Egress discouraged during unscheduled hours." There were additional documents, pages of procedures I didn't understand, emergency codes that used symbols instead of colors, a list of known perceptual deviations, and how to report them. One page simply read, "Do not follow the sounds, even if they use your name." By the time I reached the end of the folder, I felt something like nausea, but not physical. A mental twist, like the edge of my perception had been pulled slightly forward. I wasn't dizzy, but I was displaced. Something in the room felt unfamiliar, but I couldn't identify what had changed. I looked up and saw the vent grill had a small circle drawn in black marker in the bottom right corner. I didn't remember seeing that when I came in. I stared at it for what felt like minutes. Then I closed the folder, placed it inside the desk drawer, and locked it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired, but because I wasn't sure sleep would be safe. The sound system in the cabin crackled every 20 minutes or so with static. No announcements, just reminders that I wasn't alone. My keycard pulsed a dim green every time I touched it. And from somewhere in the walls, maybe the pipes, maybe deeper, I heard a knock. Not loud, not urgent, just deliberate. 3 soft taps. Wait. Then 3 again. I never responded. But I remember wondering, as the seconds crawled past, how did it know my name? By the morning of the second day, I'd memorized the rhythm of the lights in the corridor outside my cabin. 11 seconds of pale fluorescence, then the pulse. I no longer needed to count. My body had begun to internalize the cycle, syncing my footsteps to it whenever I ventured out. I didn't like that. I tried to break the pattern on purpose, walk off beat, slow down, pause mid-step, but my muscles always seemed to correct themselves, as if the hallway was training me in reverse. I left my cabin at what I guessed to be 0700. The platform didn't operate on local time. It didn't operate on any time at all. There were no clocks in the corridors, no shift bells, no announcements. Time was inferred by repetition, by when meals appeared, when the lights brightened, when the walls hummed louder than usual. I followed the faded signage toward the upper deck marked mechanical oversight. I hadn't been told to go there. I hadn't been told to go anywhere. The orientation folder made it clear I would not receive direct assignments, only environmental cues. Whatever that meant, I figured exploration would count as compliance. The passage twisted through catwalks and pressure doors that opened with reluctant shutters. Everything was too quiet, as if the air itself had been muffled. I passed an empty workshop with dozens of power tools bolted to benches, none of them wired. The cables all ended mid-air or were snipped cleanly at the base, as if whatever energy they once carried had been deliberately severed. Not for safety, but for silence. Eventually I reached a room that didn't match any section of the map from the folder. It was shaped like an inverted funnel, narrow at the entrance and expanding outward into a semicircular pit filled with control consoles. But every screen was dark. Every terminal was labeled with alphanumeric codes I didn't recognize, designations like DSK F19 and Redone Thresh. Above the consoles, bolted to the curved ceiling, was a speaker array with a mesh cover. The mesh was slightly peeled at one corner, revealing something black behind it, like a lens or a cavity. I looked at it too long and had to steady myself on the console. My vision had begun to ripple slightly, as if the air between me and the ceiling wasn't fixed. Then, the first sound came. A low, deep metallic grinding. It was so faint I thought it was my own jaw at first, clenching without realizing. But no, it grew. It rolled through the floor in pulses. A kind of shuddering resonance, like something massive shifting far beneath us. I looked around for someone, anyone, but I was alone. Or I thought I was. A shadow flickered just beyond the entrance of the room. Not a person. A shape. Thin. Tall. Upright. It moved too fast for my eyes to catch its form, and yet I felt the afterimage in my skull like an echo of something never meant to be perceived directly. I backed out of the room slowly and returned to the main corridor. I found another crew member, eventually. She was standing beside a bulkhead labeled Cargo Retention 4, holding a clipboard that appeared to be blank. Her uniform was pristine, pressed, too clean. When I approached, she turned without surprise, as if she had already known I was coming. I asked her if she felt the tremor earlier, and her response was, There are no drills scheduled today. I asked again, more directly this time. She didn't blink. Just repeated the sentence, same tone, same cadence. There are no drills scheduled today. Then she pointed to the wall-mounted panel behind her, pressed a blue button, and walked through the opening door without looking back. The door shut behind her with a hiss that sounded like a breath being held. I returned to my cabin and opened the folder again. This time, the pages weren't in the same order. Or maybe they were, and I had just failed to remember. Page 4 was now blank. Page 6, which I swore had been a list of prohibited maintenance actions, now had only a symbol, a looping black spiral drawn in thick ink with no text. I touched it without meaning to. The ink smudged slightly on my finger, but not like fresh ink. It was warm, almost pulsing. I closed the folder again, locked the drawer, and slid a chair in front of it, as if that would somehow stop it from shifting in the night. The platform was getting louder, not with voices or work, but with infrastructure. The pipes groaned more than before. The air vents hissed irregularly, expelling bursts of warm air that smelled faintly like burning salt. The deck plates vibrated in cycles. 2 short rumbles, then a long pause. At first I thought it was machinery warming up, but it kept happening, even at night. Always the same rhythm. 2 pulses, pause. 2 pulses, pause. I began to hear it in my sleep, or what little sleep I managed. I woke up with the pattern still in my bones. On the 3rd day, I found a section of the platform that wasn't listed in the orientation folder at all. It was behind a misaligned hatch in the auxiliary corridor, a maintenance tunnel marked with an X, made of black tape. I stepped through. The tunnel beyond was narrower, lined with metal mesh flooring, and lined with conduit that buzzed faintly when I stepped near it. At the end of the tunnel was a door with a biometric panel. I didn't have clearance. I didn't even try. But as I turned to leave, the panel lit up green and the door clicked open on its own. The room was circular, dim, and smelled of copper and ozone. In the center was a single chair facing a window. Not a porthole. A window. Full-sized, thick, and completely transparent. Outside was water. Black, heavy, and unmoving. Not the surface ocean I'd flown over days before. This was something deeper. The pressure lines on the walls indicated we were well below sea level, maybe as far down as level 5, though I had no way of verifying that. On the other side of the glass, something pulsed. Faintly. A light? No. It didn't illuminate anything. It just blinked. Like a signal. Or an eye. I sat in the chair. I don't know why. Maybe I was supposed to. Maybe someone was watching to see if I would. The moment I sat down, the pulse stopped. The window darkened slightly, as if acknowledging me. I sat for a full hour, or what I estimated to be an hour, and nothing else happened. When I finally stood and left, the door sealed behind me, and the biometric panel went dark. That night, the knocking returned. Louder. Not from the walls this time, but from beneath the floor. Same pattern. 3 knocks. Wait. 3 knocks again. I pressed my ear to the floor and listened. No voice. No words. Just presence. In the darkness, the vent light flickered once, and I thought I saw a shape leaning in from the corner of the room. Not standing. Leaning. As if observing me with great effort. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, it was gone. The next morning, the folder was back on my desk. Open. Page 6 was blank again. But now page 9 had new text. Handwritten. Just 1 sentence. They are not drills. They are rehearsals. I didn't touch the folder again for the rest of the day. I avoided the biometric door for 3 days. Not out of fear exactly, but out of something more stubborn. A kind of quiet rebellion that reminded me of being stationed in Bahrain, when we were told never to remove our boots near the desalination tanks. Everyone assumed there was a practical reason. Some environmental protocol or pressure hazard. Then one night, drunk and bitter, I took my boots off on purpose and stood there barefoot for 10 minutes. Nothing happened. But the water tasted different the next day. That's the feeling I had here. Like I was participating in something without understanding the rules, and that disobedience might be the only remaining freedom. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the blinking outside the glass. That strange pulse beneath the ocean, waiting just beyond visibility. I wondered if it was looking back. On the 4th morning, I noticed the corridor had changed. Not in appearance. Visually, it was the same faded steel, the same repeating vents, the same faint stain under the fire hose bracket. But the length was different. I walked it twice and timed my steps. 78 on the first pass, 93 on the second. I went back to my room and took a pen from the drawer. I returned to the hallway and made a small mark on the wall with the date. When I walked it again, the mark was gone. In its place was another spiral, thin, etched directly into the wall this time, like someone had carved it with a fine blade. I touched it and felt nothing, but my hand tingled afterward like it had been near static electricity. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the vent, waited for the flicker. It came at 0342, and with it, the hum. Not the usual infrastructure groan, but a low, vibrating note that settled in my chest like tension before a migraine. Then the knock returned. 3 times. Only this time, it wasn't from below. It came from my door. A slow, deliberate tapping, like someone using a single knuckle. I stood, reached for the handle, then stopped. The folder on the desk had moved again. Page 9 was missing. In its place, a handwritten diagram. Concentric circles, each one labeled with codes I didn't recognize. LVL 0, LVL 3, LVL 6, chamber Omega. In the center, elevator shaft, AN. I hadn't seen anything resembling an elevator on the platform. We had stairs, ladders, maintenance lifts. But this looked like something else, something deeper. At 0600, I left my cabin and walked past the cargo bays toward the northern module. It was the only area I hadn't explored. The corridors here were darker, the lights less frequent. There was water on the floor, not from rain or broken pipes. Condensation. A kind of unnatural humidity that clung to the metal in patches like skin sweat. I followed the path down 3 levels, each less marked than the last. No signs. No warnings. Just bare steel and that distant hum. Finally, I reached a set of blast doors labeled Maintenance Logistics, Core Vertical. The panel beside them blinked amber, then green as I approached. No scan. No code. It simply opened. Inside was a shaft. Circular. Deep. So deep I couldn't see the bottom. Cables ran along the walls, some bundled, some loose, all disappearing into the darkness below. And there was an elevator. Not the kind you'd find in a building. It was industrial. Open-framed. Rusted mesh floor. Exposed hydraulic rails. A lever console with no markings. Just 4 notches carved into the panel. I pulled the lever down to the first notch. The elevator shuddered, whined, then began to descend. There were no lights on the way down, just the dim glow from above, fading rapidly, and the slow rhythm of the lift creaking against the shaft wall. I counted seconds. Lost track around 50. The air grew colder, then warmer, then still again. Finally, a light appeared below. A dull red band along the edge of a door. The lift stopped on its own. No chime, no announcement. I stepped off into a corridor I didn't recognize. The walls here were different, smoother, less utilitarian, coated in some kind of matte polymer that absorbed light. My footsteps didn't echo. They didn't even register. The silence was absolute. As I moved forward, I noticed markings on the wall. Numbers, scratched in sequence, descending as I walked. 82, 81, 80. They weren't floor levels. There were too many. I reached a junction where the walls opened into a circular chamber. In the center stood a pillar, and on the pillar was a monitor. It flickered once and turned on. There was a face. Mine. Not a reflection. A video. Me, staring blankly at the screen, as if I had been standing there moments ago, except my mouth moved. It said something silently. I couldn't hear it. No sound. I reached toward the monitor and it turned off. Behind me, the elevator had vanished. The shaft was sealed. I stood still for what felt like half an hour. Then the lights dimmed further. Not off, just lower, like a heartbeat slowing. That's when I heard movement. Soft and deliberate. Not footsteps. Dragging. Something being pulled along the floor. I turned toward the corridor I'd entered through and saw nothing. Just the spiral again. This time etched into the floor, larger, stretching down the hallway ahead. And, in the center of it, something small. A device? A box? I approached. It was a cassette recorder. Analog. Old military issue. No tape. Just the machine. Buzzing faintly. I picked it up. Underneath, someone had carved into the floor. If you hear your own voice, do not answer. I put the recorder in my pocket and turned around. There was a second elevator door. It wasn't there before. This one had no panel, no lever. Just a handprint symbol in faded red, and beneath it, a label. LVL. 12. Observation deck null. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I walked the corridor back, retracing my steps, counting the number sequence in reverse. 80, 81, 82, and then 82 again, and again. I passed the same mark 3 times before I realized I wasn't moving forward. The hallway was shifting, looping, or maybe I was. I closed my eyes and pressed my hand to the wall, trying to find a seam, a hatch, anything that wasn't smooth. And then I felt it. A small groove, shaped like the spiral again. This time it was warm, almost pulsing. I pressed my palm into it, and the corridor lights blinked once. A door opened. Not the elevator. Something else. I stepped through and found myself in a storage bay I had seen on my first day. Only now the equipment was different. More recent. My name was on a crate. Stamped in bold, H7 clearance, Renfro, M. I opened the crate and inside was a helmet. Deep Sea class, full face. Scratched but functional, and beneath it a photograph. It was me, standing on the deck, smiling. But I've never smiled here. Not once. And someone had scribbled across the photo in ink. This time, stay inside the line. I turned the photo over. Blank. Except for a faint spiral. Still warm. I didn't go back to my cabin. I don't know if I still had one. Something in the platform's architecture had shifted while I was below. The route from the logistics corridor no longer matched the schematic I remembered from orientation, and I stopped trusting the signage after I saw a duplicate hallway marked Gantry Access South on both ends, mirrored down to the corrosion patterns on the pipes. I traced a new path by memory, keeping my hand to the left wall like a man inside a maze. It led me to a stairwell I had never seen before, narrower than regulation and coated with dust. There was no reason for this part of the platform to accumulate dust. We were surrounded by sea air, moisture, salt. This wasn't sand or rust. It looked like drywall powder, like something had been shaved down to make room for something else. I descended until the walls grew wet, and the lights went from white to yellow. A marker near the floor read 10, but it had been crossed out in red and overwritten. 12, or. I don't know what the R meant. I moved slowly, checking each hatch. Most were welded shut or sealed by layers of tape that had been painted over so many times the words underneath were fossilized. The sound of machinery faded the deeper I went. By the time I reached the terminal door, I could no longer hear the engines, the pumps, the pressure regulators. I was somewhere beneath the infrastructure itself, and it felt wrong, like I was hearing the absence of sound, not silence. A low-pressure void where air wasn't welcome. The door to observation deck null wasn't marked, but I recognized it from the spiral. It was carved directly into the steel, larger this time, taking up half the panel. I placed my hand on it, and the surface was warm again, just like in the hallway above. It opened without resistance. No hydraulic hiss, no servo lock, just a gentle sway, like it had been waiting. The room beyond was enormous. Not by architectural standards, but by atmospheric ones. It felt vast, like space itself had thinned. The ceiling was obscured in darkness, the floor covered in what looked like matte black epoxy, but with a subtle grain to it, like skin or membrane stretched over a surface too smooth to be natural. At the far end, a single chair, facing a wall of glass. The view was incomprehensible. It wasn't the ocean. Not anymore. There was no light refraction, no particulate drift, just darkness with depth, like staring into a negative image of space. Occasionally something would move across the frame. Slow, deliberate, massive. Not fish, not whales. Shapes. Slivers of motion. One of them paused directly in front of the window, and I felt my heart begin to race even though I couldn't see anything clearly. It was like my body recognized the shape before my brain did. Something primal, pre-linguistic. The silhouette didn't move, but I could tell it was aware of me, watching, or perhaps echoing my gaze back at me with equal curiosity. I approached the chair. It was worn, cloth-covered standard ops issue, except the serial number had been filed down and replaced with a handwritten tag, Renfro, OBS, null, active. My name, but I'd never sat there. Not once. I reached forward and touched the console beside the chair. It powered on instantly. No boot sequence. Just one message on a black screen. Resume observation. YN. I didn't press anything. My hands hovered. The screen blinked once and changed without input. Observation active. 2240 cycles remaining. The glass darkened slightly. Symbols began to overlay the field of view. Rings, angles, radial points. A pattern I didn't recognize but which felt iterative, designed to converge. Then I heard it. The voice. My voice. But not in the room. From behind me. I turned and saw a speaker panel mounted on the wall. No wires. Just a single diode lit red. The voice repeated, Michael Renfro. Observation is active. Please remain seated. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't triggered anything. But the voice matched me perfectly. Tone. Cadence. Even the subtle rasp I'd had in my throat since arriving. Then it said something else. This time, do not move your hands. I didn't obey. I backed away from the chair, and the screen flickered again. A new message. Manual override detected. Recalibrating session. The lighting in the room dimmed further. The glass wall shifted. No longer a window, but a screen. A replay began. Footage of me, or someone exactly like me, sitting in the chair, observing, not moving, watching the same darkness I had just seen. Except in the video, the darkness cracked. A fracture appeared across the field, and from it, a pulse. Bright, red, organic. It expanded rapidly, filled the chamber, and consumed the observer. The image froze on the frame of me, mouth open, eyes black, skin pulled tight like vacuum exposure. The screen cut to black. The chair behind me was now occupied. I didn't see it move. I didn't hear anything. But someone, or something, was seated there now. Not me. Not quite. Same uniform. Same build. But older. Worn. The head turned slightly and I saw the profile. My face. Aged 10 years. Maybe more. The eyes were dull, as if reflection itself had been drained from them. It didn't speak. It didn't move again. But I heard my own voice once more from the speaker. You left too early last time. I stumbled backward into the wall. No hatch, no exit. Just the spiral again. It was moving, slowly turning like a clock hand dragged through molasses. I pressed my hand into it and felt the same warmth, but this time it hurt. Burned. I pulled away and my palm was raw, skin inflamed with concentric ridges now embedded beneath the flesh. The room pulsed. Once. And the lights went out. I don't remember what happened next. I came to on the floor of my original cabin. The real one. Clean. Unmoved. As if I had never left. Except the recorder was still in my pocket, and the photo of me smiling on the deck was tucked beneath my pillow. Someone had written a new message on the back. You broke the cycle. But not the pattern. I stared at my hand. The spiral had faded, but I could still feel it. Like a second heartbeat beneath the skin. I went to the mirror and saw something in my eyes. Something I hadn't noticed before. A film. A shimmer. Like oil on water. I blinked. It didn't go away. I turned to the vent. The knock came at exactly 0342. But this time, it wasn't from outside. It came from inside the mirror. The knock from inside the mirror was not loud. It was measured, as though it knew exactly how much force to use to be noticed but not feared. At least not immediately. It came in 2 short bursts, each separated by an unnatural silence, the kind that seemed to press inward rather than expand outward. I didn't move at first. I waited. I watched my reflection as though it might betray me with the slightest twitch, the smallest asynchronous blink. But nothing changed. My image remained static, perfectly aligned with every breath, every subtle shift of weight. Still, I knew something was behind it. Not behind the glass. Behind the idea of the mirror itself. That pane was no longer a boundary between light and perception. It was an interface, a membrane stretched thin over something watching back. I stepped closer, slowly, the floor beneath my boots emitting a faint groan, though I could have sworn I wasn't heavy enough to make it sound that old. My own reflection didn't seem off until I reached within arm's length. That's when I noticed the lag. A half-second delay between my movements and the mirror's reply. Just enough to make my breath catch in my throat. I lifted my hand. My reflection did too, but it didn't stop when mine did. It lingered at the apex of the motion, as if waiting for instruction from another source, then gently returned to match my stance. I leaned in, peering into my own eyes, trying to see past them, and what stared back was not curiosity. It was expectation. The mirror version of me was waiting for something, waiting for me to do something that it had already decided on. Then came the static. Not sound, not visual distortion. It was something I felt behind my eyes. A crackling pressure, like 100 thoughts trying to form all at once, but not quite aligning. It was strongest when I looked directly into my pupils. Not the reflections, Mine. And that's when I understood. The image in the mirror wasn't mimicking me. I was mimicking it. I had been since I woke up. A frame out of sync with the original, running slightly behind the master copy. I turned away quickly, snapping my head to the right, and felt a brief resistance, like my body didn't want to obey. But it passed. The moment broke, and I stumbled back from the mirror, panting, heart pounding as though I'd just escaped something I couldn't name. I went to the corridor. The lights outside my cabin were dimmed again, but not from a power failure, more like a deliberate adjustment. Someone had tuned the fluorescence to the edge of comfort. Everything was slightly yellowed, like old paper or skin, and the shadows pooled in corners that should have been flat. I moved quickly, driven not by fear but necessity. I needed data, records, anything that could verify what had happened since I arrived. I made for the comms center, 3 decks above the crew cabins and just adjacent to the dry server room where physical logs were stored. As I moved, I passed no one. Not even a whisper of boots or distant machinery. Just the occasional flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. Too slow for rats, too fast for people. When I reached the comms deck, I found the door sealed. Not locked. Welded. Thin, deliberate lines of molten steel traced the seam between frame and hatch, smoothed over like someone had planned it weeks in advance. No sparks, no signs of rush or panic, just methodical denial. A laminated sign was bolted to the wall beside it, reading, "Maintenance scheduled, entry restricted." But the date field had been scratched out with something sharp and angry. I ran my fingers along the edge of the weld. Still warm, recently reinforced, as though someone knew I'd come here, as though they were still watching. I changed course and broke into the storage hallway behind the medbay. There used to be a maintenance terminal there for logging electrical irregularities. I doubted it would still be active, but I had to try. I passed a row of decommissioned pressure suits, some hanging, some crumpled, and noticed for the first time that one of them was still damp. Not sweat, not water, something thicker. I didn't stop to smell it. I reached the terminal and powered it on. The interface flickered, booted, then crashed. I tried again. On the third attempt, it stabilized enough for me to input a diagnostics query. I didn't look for system health or structural integrity. I searched for footage, archived feeds. The platform's internal surveillance ran continuously on redundant drives. I knew the loop cycle, 30-day retention, scrubbed only by direct command. I accessed the camera logs from Deck B, the day of my arrival. The feed played normally at first. Me, stepping off the transport vessel, walking across the tarmac, saluting an officer whose name I hadn't bothered to remember. But then, at the 37-second mark, the feed froze. A frame held too long, then another. The playback resumed at a slightly different angle, as though the camera had moved, but it was a fixed mount. The next few minutes were unremarkable, until I reached the footage from my initial visit to the logistics corridor. That's when things became impossible. The camera showed me entering the corridor, pausing, and then splitting. 2 versions of myself, diverging at a junction that didn't exist. One went left, the other forward. Both vanished into separate blind spots. The footage glitched again, and then only one version returned. Me, I assumed, walking normally as though nothing had happened. I tried to rewind, but the system locked. A message appeared in red across the screen. Entity confirmed. Observation required. I backed away from the console. The lights in the hallway flickered. A low hum began to build behind the walls. Not vibration, not mechanical. It was closer to the sound you hear inside your own head when submerged. Internal, oppressive, unplaceable. I turned back toward the medbay and saw something move behind the frosted glass door. A silhouette, broad-shouldered, familiar. I thought maybe it was just my reflection again, warped by the glass. But it didn't mimic me. It moved before I did. I took one step forward, and the figure leaned toward the glass from the inside, pressing a hand against it. The handprint bloomed into visibility. Too large, fingers too long, spacing unnatural, and it was facing outward, as if whatever was inside had been looking through the glass from my side. The moment cracked like ice. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. The corridors had shifted again. Doors led to different rooms. Stairwells changed direction. I passed my own cabin twice, though I never turned back. I kept running until I reached the lowest deck again, the forgotten one. The place beneath engineering where cables hung like wet vines and the air tasted like copper. I found the hatch marked Reservoir Subnode 2A and forced it open. Inside was dark, but it was real. No reflections, No screens. Just steel and rust and the smell of old oil. I crouched there for hours, maybe longer, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to think. But I could still feel it. The lag. Not in the world. In me. When I finally stood up, I looked at my hands. They were clean. Too clean. As if they hadn't touched a thing all day. I checked my pocket. The photo of me on the deck was gone. In its place was a torn page from a logbook. The handwriting was mine. The words weren't. If the reflection moves first, don't look away. That's when it remembers it was here before you. I crushed the page in my hand. I didn't know what I was anymore. Observer, anomaly, remnant. I only knew the platform wasn't observing me. It was remembering me. Piece by piece, layer by layer. Like an old wound itching to reopen. I stepped back into the corridor. The lights were gone now. Only a pale glow from some unknown source remained, casting my shadow in directions that didn't match the architecture. Something ahead of me breathed. Not loudly. Just once. Enough to make the corridor feel narrow and soft, as though I were inside something instead of behind it. And then I moved forward. Not because I wanted to, but because I had already been there. I used to think hallucinations came with chaos. Blurs, distortions, the mind scrambling to make sense of a reality slipping out of alignment. But here, on this platform, nothing feels scrambled. Everything is precise, clean, almost curated. That's what makes it worse. Whatever is happening to me isn't disorder. It's replacement. Rehearsed. Scripted. Like I'm being edited while still alive. When I left the subnode room, the corridor ahead of me had changed again. It no longer sloped upward toward the engineering deck, but instead led into a narrower passage lined with dormant machinery, their panels coated in a fine dust that hadn't been there the day before. Or maybe it had, and I'd simply become too used to overlooking things that refused to be remembered. The air was dry here, stale in a way that felt deliberate, recycled without a source, as though the oxygen wasn't being supplied but harvested. I walked slowly, not out of fear, but because I was starting to believe the platform wanted me to, as though pacing too fast might make the walls forget to adjust in time, and I'd see the trick being played. That thought had begun to rot inside me, that the entire installation wasn't broken, but observant, waiting, reacting. As I reached the end of the hallway, I heard it. Not a sound. A presence. Not someone. Me. I don't know how else to describe it. I felt myself before I saw him. A twin echo lodged just ahead, waiting like the end of a sentence I hadn't yet spoken. When I turned the corner, there he was, standing in the next room, facing away, staring into an inactive monitor. Same uniform, same build, same scar just under the right earlobe, where I had once cut myself shaving in the Arctic outpost 3 years ago. My immediate reaction was to call out, but my throat closed before sound could pass. Something in my body refused the logic of the moment. My mind spun with possible explanations. Delirium, isolation, psychosis, some kind of covert identity replication test, but they all felt like stage props, dressing for a scene that had already started without me. I stepped into the room. Quiet. Deliberate. The other me didn't move. I got closer. Close enough to see the faintest rise and fall of his breathing. He was alive. He was me. And yet, there was no recognition. I circled slowly, coming to stand in front of him. His eyes didn't follow. They were fixed on the monitor, which remained black. A faint hum rose from somewhere inside the paneling, like a hard drive warming up from deep sleep. I didn't speak. I just watched. Then he blinked. Once. And I realized something horrifying. I hadn't blinked at all. Not once since entering the room. I tested it. Forced my eyes closed, then opened them again. The second I did, his gaze snapped to me. Not startled. Not aggressive. Just patient. And in that patience, I saw the truth. He had been waiting. Not just in this room. Longer. Maybe from the moment I arrived. Maybe before. His face was neutral, but the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, like he was struggling to remember how expressions worked. He raised one hand, my hand, and pointed to the screen. Still black. I looked back at him, and his lips parted, but no sound came out. Only a sharp breath, like the beginning of a word that would never fully form. I turned to the monitor, hesitated, then pressed the power button. The screen lit up instantly. Not with data, not with surveillance footage, with a single image. A still frame of the two of us, me and him, standing in this very room, but reversed. In the image, I was facing the screen, and he was watching me. The timestamp was 15 minutes ahead of the current time. I checked the room for cameras. There were none. The lights dimmed slightly. My copy blinked again, and I noticed something new. His eyes weren't entirely human. Not wrong. Just too smooth. Too symmetrical. As if someone had built them from memory. A model. An approximation. I looked back at the screen. The image had changed. Now I was alone, slumped against the wall, eyes open but distant. Behind me, the other version of me was walking away through a door that didn't exist in the room I was standing in. The lights dimmed further. My pulse pounded behind my ears. I reached out to touch him. My fingers hovered near his chest, expecting resistance, heat, life. But I never made contact. He stepped backward without moving his legs. A shift, like a frame skipped in a film reel. I blinked again. He was gone. The room was empty. The monitor was off. And I was alone. I backed out slowly, still half expecting him to appear behind me. The corridor had changed again. The machinery was gone, replaced by a narrower path lined with featureless white panels. Sterile. Hospital-like. My boots made no sound on the floor. That's when I noticed the humming again, not from the walls, but from inside me. A low, resonant vibration that made my ribs ache slightly, like a tuning fork had been struck somewhere inside my chest cavity. I touched the wall. It was warm, organic. I whispered something, anything, but the sound didn't carry. It was eaten, swallowed by the air. I found a door with no label, only a key slot. I had no key, but when I reached for the handle, the door opened on its own. Inside was a small, circular chamber with a single chair in the center and a bank of monitors forming a half-moon around it. Every screen was off, except one. That one showed the exterior of the platform, the ocean, the endless gray sky, the rippling water. But there were no clouds, no movement. The sea was frozen in place. I blinked hard, thinking it was a glitch, but it wasn't a screen. It was a window. I stepped closer, touched the glass. It was solid, cold. Outside, the world remained motionless. I looked down toward the deck where I'd first disembarked when I arrived. Someone was standing there, watching the sea. Too far to see clearly, but the stance was unmistakable. I knew it before my brain finished processing the image. It was me. Again. And then, suddenly, it wasn't. The figure turned. Not gradually, but all at once. No transition. One frame to the next. And the face wasn't mine. It was a blend. Familiar features melted into something not quite right. Like it was designed to look like me, but by someone who had only seen photographs, or read a description. It smiled. Not warmly, but politely. As though it were being polite for me. It raised a hand. Waved. Slowly. Not to get attention. Not in greeting, but as acknowledgement. I was expected. Then, the lights in the chamber began to pulse. Not rapidly, but with a deep rhythm, like the heartbeat of something buried far below. The monitors all turned on at once, flooding the room with static and fragmented images. Corridors, rooms, reflections, close-ups of my own face sleeping, eating, walking, framed at odd angles. Some from above, some from below. Some from places I hadn't been yet. I staggered backward, eyes wide, trying to find something real to anchor myself to. The chair in the center of the room creaked slightly. I hadn't touched it, but it turned toward me, inviting. I didn't sit. I couldn't. If I sat, I feared I'd never get up again. Instead, I turned and left. The hallway had changed once more. Now, every panel bore my name. Over and over. Stamped into the metal like a product serial number. As if I had been made here. Not stationed. Not transferred. Made. And that's when I realized the worst part of all. I wasn't afraid of being copied. I was afraid of being overwritten. And somewhere on this platform, the replacement was already practicing my smile. Sleep has become a negotiation. I no longer drift off. I surrender. Each night I sit on the edge of the bed in my cabin and look at the thin strip of mirror bolted to the wall. It's warped from moisture. Slightly bowed, like it's been trying to bend inward toward the room. I stare at it and wait to see if my reflection blinks before I do. I haven't caught it yet, but I know it will happen. Everything here rehearses. Everything here learns. Especially when I sleep. I've taken to leaving subtle markers, small things no one else would notice. A paperclip on the corner of the desk bent at a distinct angle. A circle scratched under the sink. A single hair taped to the underside of the doorframe. In the morning, they're always almost untouched. Slightly rotated, the circle faintly smeared. The hair, sometimes missing. And when I replace it, the next night it comes back, but split in half, as though something was trying to recreate it and forgot the original color. I never find the tape. There's no camera in my cabin. I checked. Twice. Then I found one behind the ventilation panel. It wasn't wired to anything, just a lens. Watching. No data cable. No power. Just a glass eye embedded in the wall like a fossilized organ. I unscrewed it, crushed it in a towel, flushed the shards. The next day, the vent cover had been replaced. The screws were new, and the towel was gone. I reported nothing. There's a pattern to it now. I fall asleep reluctantly, knowing that when I do, something inside the platform turns on. A program. A system. A rehearsal. I first noticed it in the dream. At least, I told myself it was a dream. I was in the same cabin, same bed, same dim blue light humming from the overhead panel. But the door was open. I never sleep with it open. Ever. But in the dream, it was just ajar, the hallway beyond slightly misted, the kind of humidity you get when steam mixes with cold air. I got up and stepped into the corridor. The walls were smooth, unmarked. No safety signage, no junction boxes. Just bare white metal. I walked for a while. There were no intersections. Just one long corridor that subtly curved, not left or right, but inward, like a spiral descending on a horizontal plane. I passed a room with no door. Inside were 3 beds, each occupied. Figures under sheets. Identical builds. My build. The air smelled faintly of plastic and heat. One of them was breathing out of rhythm with the others. A small, rapid pulse in the blanket where the chest rose and fell. I approached, peeled back the sheet. It was me. Again. But this version had its eyes open. Wide. Unblinking. They stared at the ceiling as if reading invisible instructions. I whispered something. I think it was, "What are you?" And the mouth moved, mimicking my question. Perfectly. Not a whisper. A silent echo. And in the space of that breath, the figure to the left of him began to move. Then the one on the right. All 3 sat up in perfect synchrony. My face, my posture, my injuries. Every last imperfection duplicated. Except one. None of them cast a shadow. I woke up gasping. My sheets were wet. Not from sweat. From condensation. Like the room had cooled too fast after being warm for hours. The mirror had fogged. My boots were dry. I hadn't gone anywhere. But the towel I used to dry off was folded differently. Hospital fold. Corner tuck. I began testing the dream. Staying awake as long as possible. Writing down every detail the moment I awoke. But the rehearsals adapted. They became more subtle. Sometimes I'd wake up on my back, even though I always fall asleep on my side. Sometimes my boots would be placed under the bed, though I never leave them there. And once, only once, I woke up in the wrong uniform. Still mine. Still my size. But the fabric smelled faintly of oil and antiseptic, and there was a tear on the sleeve I didn't recognize. It felt like a stagehand had dressed me in a hurry. Then came the voice. Not outside. Not inside either. It wasn't auditory. It was written across my vision like a HUD prompt. Brief. Faint. Glitching. You may stand by, that's all. No tone. No command. Just a placeholder. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. It vanished. The next night, it came again. You may stand by. Rehearsal in progress. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I kept my eyes open, watching the reflection in the warped mirror. And in that moment, I saw the impossible. The reflection closed its eyes before I did. I recoiled, stood up, smashed the mirror with the heel of my hand. Glass cracked in a spiderweb, but didn't fall. Behind it, I saw circuitry. Thin lines of filament running like veins. I backed away. The message flickered one last time. Rehearsal complete. Thank you. And the cabin light shut off. I stood in the dark for hours, afraid to sleep, afraid to move, knowing that the platform wasn't observing me anymore. It was using me, measuring, testing, recording my reactions to see if the rehearsal had been successful. I taped every edge of the mirror with duct tape. I tore out the vent again. No lens this time, just a smooth, dark recess filled with heat, like something had just finished crawling through. I filed no report. I told no one, because I wasn't sure if I was the original anymore. And then, the sleepwalking started. I woke up in the cargo lift with no memory of how I got there. 3 decks down. No shoes. No ID badge. The tablet I always kept on the bedside table was in my hand. Screen cracked. Camera open. No video recorded. Just an error message. Device cannot recognize primary user. I wasn't registered anymore. I made my way back to the cabin. Door was still locked from the inside. No footprints, nothing disturbed. But on the bed, folded neatly, was my uniform. Washed, dried, and pressed. It smelled like someone else. That night, I tried not to sleep. I made coffee, then more. I read maintenance logs until the words blurred. I tried to write something, anything, to prove I still had thoughts that belonged to me. But my handwriting looked wrong. Slanted too far to the left. Curves that weren't mine. At some point, I must have nodded off. I woke up to see someone sitting at the foot of the bed. Not moving. Not turning. Just present. When I blinked, they were gone. But the bed creaked like someone had just stood up. And on the wall above the mirror, now covered in tape, someone had scrawled 4 words in black grease pencil. You pass every time there's a man who stands at the far end of the platform, just beyond the last flare stack. I've seen him 6 times now, always during weather. He appears when the sea is violent, when the platform trembles from deep surges below the keel line, when the thunder doesn't just crack but rolls in tremors through the steel bones of this place. He doesn't move. He doesn't shelter. He watches. Not the storm, but something beneath it. And I've come to believe he isn't one of us. The first time I saw him was during the midnight storm last week. I was on inspection duty, or at least that's what the log said. I don't remember volunteering, and no one signed the assignment. I had the yellow flashlight in my hand, the one with the cracked lens, and I was sweeping it across Deck H, the cold storage level where the pipes moan even without wind. I paused by the emergency hatch that faces out toward the northeast derrick, and that's when I saw him. A silhouette at the edge of the deck, backlit by a halo of static lightning, tall and still, his hand resting against the safety railing like he was steadying the entire ocean with his touch. I thought it was Jackson. The outline fit. Tall, heavy-shouldered, slightly hunched, but when I called out, the figure didn't move. I called again. No response. I moved closer, flashlight bouncing off the steel grates and safety signs. Rain pelted down in sheets, and the air felt electrically wrong, like everything had been ionized. And still, the man didn't move. It wasn't Jackson. It wasn't anyone. By the time I reached the railing, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no shift in shadow. Just absent. The metal where he'd stood was dry. I didn't report it. The second time was worse. I was in the control room, running diagnostics on the platform's torque regulators, when the tremor hit. The whole rig groaned as if a fault line had cracked directly beneath us. Screens flickered. Radios cut to static. For 3 full seconds, the platform felt like it had dropped half a meter, then snapped back into place. I checked the seismic readout. No anomalies, no tectonic activity. But the instruments had all jumped in unison. When the monitors came back online, one of the external cameras showed him, standing by the same railing, same posture, same stillness. But this time, he turned. It was slight, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. His head rotated in the direction of the camera, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something else. Not a face. Not really. More like an impression, a sculpted absence, a blur in the shape of intention. Then the feed died again. I rebooted the system, flushed the logs, scrubbed the footage. When I reloaded the feed, the camera ID was gone. The system had deleted its registry, as if the port had never existed. Still, I didn't report it. Because who the hell do you report that to? The others don't talk about the storms. Not the real ones. We all pretend they're part of the job. But I've watched them closely, and I've noticed something that doesn't fit. Every time one of those system-level squalls approaches, those too fast, too localized cells that spawn over nothing, we lose signal contact with the mainland for exactly 13 minutes. Not 12, not 14, 13. During that window, the clocks don't sync, the logs don't update, the platform becomes air-gapped. And I believe that's when he comes. I tried to track him once. I left my cabin 2 hours before the scheduled system maintenance storm, wearing a backup coverall, carrying a hidden body cam I'd lifted from the decom team's locker. I stayed near the forward crane, pretending to inspect stress bolts while the pressure dropped and the sky went green with ionic turbulence. When the first lightning struck, I saw him again. This time, closer. He was standing on the access catwalk below the comms tower. No lights, no sound. Just his silhouette against the backscatter glow of the incoming squall. I watched through the lens. I kept recording. Then he raised his hand. Not a wave, not a threat. A gesture. A signal meant for someone else. I heard movement behind me, spun around. No one. Just air thick with static. When I turned back, he was gone. And the camera was warm in my hand. Too warm. I checked the footage later. There was none. Just a single frame. A still image of the railing. And the words burned into the timestamp bar. You are not cleared for this viewing. The file was corrupted. Not deleted. Corrupted. As if overwritten by something non-human, something that didn't understand how formats worked, but knew how to mark territory. That night, I found new text scrawled across the duct tape covering my mirror. He watches to see who remembers. I didn't write it. I hadn't slept yet. Since then, I've seen him 4 more times. Always during weather. Always alone. And always when the rig is cut off. Once, I tried to tell Rosales. Just hinted at it. She smiled like I'd made a joke. But later, when she passed me in the corridor, she dropped her voice low and said, "We all see him. Just don't let them know you know." She didn't elaborate. She avoided me for 3 days after that. Then she disappeared. Officially, she was transferred off-platform. That's what the update said. But her boots are still under her bunk. Her badge was still scanned at the mess hall that morning. And I swear I heard her voice humming in the waste reclamation shaft 2 nights ago. Not calling for help. Just humming. Like a child trying to stay calm in the dark. The others walk past like nothing's wrong. Like everything rehearsed here is normal. I know better. I've started mapping the man's appearances. Overlaying storm paths with time signatures from equipment failures, clock sync losses, and memory blackouts. The pattern isn't random. He's following something. A schedule. Maybe a countdown. Tonight is another weather event. The log shows system maintenance. 13-minute blackout. And I've been assigned inspection detail. Alone. East platform. Same deck. Same railing. I'm bringing no flashlight this time. No camera. No radio. Just a steel wrench in my pocket, a flare in my sock, and a question in my throat. If I see him again, I'm going to ask. Ask who he's watching for. Ask why it matters that I remember. And if he answers, I'm not sure I'll come back. The flare stacks haven't gone out in 4 days. That's unusual. They're supposed to cycle automatically, burn off excess gas, then throttle down to conserve fuel. But they haven't blinked once. The flames are too clean, too stable. They don't dance in the wind anymore. They just burn, like static sculptures, like they're not reacting to anything real. I stood out there for almost an hour last night watching them, and I swear the flames weren't making any sound. No whoosh, no hiss, just silence. As if the fire were simulated, as if it were burning for effect, not for purpose. There's a phrase I keep hearing the crew say in passing. I don't think they realize they're repeating it. I've caught it 5 separate times, from 5 different mouths, always under their breath, always in transition, walking from the galley to the core elevator, or signing off from a maintenance shift, or drying their hands in the sink. We're just keeping it warm. I asked Cooper what he meant by that after I caught him muttering it outside the loading bay. He blinked, looked confused, then laughed like I was joking. Said he didn't remember saying anything, but his pupils dilated when I pushed. Just for a second. Then he looked past me and asked if I'd checked the level 6 battery array yet. We don't have a level 6 battery array. I followed him later that day. Just a hunch. I pretended to drop my clipboard near the incinerator chute, waited until he passed, then stayed 2 corridors behind. He walked with the posture of a man headed to routine duty, but the longer I watched, the less it felt right. His steps were too even, his turns too crisp. Not military, not trained. Programmed. At the end of the lower hall, near the out-of-service desalination tank, he opened a panel I didn't even know existed. No key, no scan. Just pressed his hand against the steel, and it clicked open. I barely caught a glimpse before the panel closed behind him. Inside, there was no ladder. No service tunnel. Just a faint red light and a surface that looked too smooth for anything on this rig. I waited 22 minutes. He didn't come back out. When he did appear again, 2 hours later, he was walking out of the infirmary, sipping coffee, laughing with Jackson. No mention of the hidden door. No trace of the sweat he'd had earlier. I asked him what he'd been working on. He said ballast recalibration. I checked the logs. No such task was scheduled. I checked again later. The entry was there, but I swear it wasn't before. It had been inserted. Timestamp aligned. Signature attached. And yet, I remember clearly. There was a blank line where that entry now sits. I can still see the blankness in my mind. Like a scar that's been overwritten by artificial skin. There's another thing. The sleeping quarters don't smell like people anymore. I know that sounds absurd, but it's something you notice when you live in a closed environment for months. A mix of sweat, oil, detergent, steam, breath, that human scent. But now it smells filtered, not clean, fabricated, as if the air is being recirculated with the memory of human presence, rather than the presence itself. The beds are always made, even when I'm the first to wake. The showers are always dry. I started marking my towel with a thread loop. The next day it was gone, replaced with a new one, identical in color and wear. But my loop was missing. Someone, or something, is maintaining an image of occupancy, of routine, of use. Like the whole platform is being staged. We're just keeping it warm. And for who? I haven't seen Myers in 5 days. He was the only one who still ate with me in the mess, even when conversation dried up. We'd sit in silence, listen to the wind groan through the ductwork, pretend to care about football scores from the mainland. Then he just vanished. His bunk was stripped bare within hours, his nameplate removed. The log says he transferred off platform, same generic line, but the last chopper out didn't have room for personnel, only cargo. I know because I watched it lift off, and I watched the manifest load. It had 22 sealed crates and 0 passengers. I asked Kershaw about it casually, while we shared a cigarette near the generator inlet. He nodded like it was normal. Said Myers had been reassigned to a cold weather station north of Thule, but when I pressed for details, he looked me dead in the eye and said, he never really fit here anyway. Then he crushed the cigarette out on the toe of his boot and walked away. That night, I dreamed of a table set for dinner. All the plates were warm, steaming with food, but no one sat in the chairs. The chairs were turned inward, facing the table, as if waiting, and there was a sound under the table. Something shifting, crawling, whispering. When I woke up, my boots were wet. The hallway was dry. The cleaning bot had logged no activity. The water wasn't salt. It smelled like melting plastic and blood. I tried not to think about it. The voice from the intercom has started to change. It used to be neutral, just system alerts and check-ins. But now the cadence is wrong. Too slow, too personal. It said my name yesterday. Not the call sign. Not the room ID. My actual name. Elliot, prepare for handoff. That's all. Then it cut. No follow-up. I called down to comms. No response. No record of the broadcast. Jackson claimed he heard nothing, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. I don't think the others sleep anymore. I've walked the halls at every hour. They're always up, standing near windows, sitting at terminals that haven't worked in weeks, staring at blank screens. Sometimes they whisper to each other, but not in English, not in any language I recognize. More like a code made of rhythm and breath. We're just keeping it warm. For who? What are they waiting for? I checked the personnel database last night. Something's wrong with the entries. Half of them loop. You click on a name, and it redirects to a duplicate profile. Slightly different stats, slightly altered photos, but the same ID number. I tried exporting the list. The file corrupted instantly, replaced with a single sentence, human redundancy detected. No unique processes identified. My own name was grayed out. No editing allowed, no access permissions. Like I'd already been archived. I'm writing this from the maintenance bay, the only place I haven't found a hidden camera. The panel above the main vent has been rigged with old lead lining. I think it blocks signal. I only found it because the rats avoid it. They run in patterns, same times every night. But they never cross the vent. Something about that space disrupts them. I'm starting to think the rats are the only real things here. Everything else feels like echo. I don't know how long I've actually been here. The days bleed. The logs contradict. My watch died last week, and the replacements all read the same time, 02.17. Every watch, every screen, every goddamn digital readout. Always 02.17. What happens at 02.17? What are we keeping warm? I can't shake the feeling that I'm not meant to leave. That none of this is about oil, or maintenance, or atmospheric data. The rigs aren't active. The drills haven't operated in weeks. But the lights stay on. The machines hum. The food appears. The bodies repeat their motions. We're not maintaining a platform. We're maintaining a narrative, a performance. And I think the audience is coming soon. I don't know from where. But I can feel the seats filling up. I've stopped using mirrors. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I'm afraid I won't recognize what's missing. My face has become a mask of assumptions. I shave the same angles, wash the same features, but there's no feedback, no recognition. only memory guiding the motion. Like grooming a photograph that forgot how to look back. This morning, I stared into the stainless steel of the galley faucet, watching the blurred outline of my reflection. I tilted my head, squinted, waited for the vague curve of my nose to realign, but the shape in the metal didn't follow. It lagged, less than a second, but enough. Something else is wearing me. I've been revisiting my logs, trying to piece together the order of events. I kept notes in my personal tablet, entries encrypted, compartmentalized, with timestamps cross-referenced to system events. But sometime in the last 72 hours, those entries changed. Not erased, edited, subtly. Words replaced, phrases softened. Investigate Cooper's pattern became routine check on crew behavior. Unauthorized panel discovered turned into auxiliary access verified. Even my tone had shifted, detached, compliant, like someone trying to rewrite a mental breakdown as protocol. But I know I didn't write those versions, because I remember how furious I was when I typed the originals. The pressure in my temples, the shake in my fingers. That rage doesn't come from compliance. It comes from betrayal. They've rewritten me in past tense. I checked the access logs again. Cooper's trip into the hidden panel had been overwritten, like before. But now there was something new. A task assigned to me that I never performed. Behavioral Reacquisition Trial, BRTX-1. Logged at 0217, of course. Location, Sector Red 2. We don't have a Red 2. I started following the cables. Not the obvious ones. The hidden conduits, the ones tucked behind ventilation shafts, running parallel to official grid lines but marked in faded yellow paint. Uncatalogued. No routing tags. Just a destination. Deep into the unlit lower decks. The part of the platform no one acknowledges. Where the walls still bleed rust and the air smells like sterilized meat. I found a service door jammed halfway open by a piece of old grating. Inside, there were stairs descending into total black. No lights. No guide rails. But the cable went down. So did I. I don't know how far the stairs went. They curved and dipped in uneven spirals, sometimes doubling back, sometimes ending in abrupt platforms with no doors, no markings, just bare steel sweating with condensation. The silence changed as I moved deeper. It became pressurized. Like the air wasn't empty but full of listening. At one point my ears popped, not from altitude, but from presence. I thought I heard voices below, not speaking, imitating. Snatches of conversation I'd heard earlier that day, replayed back to me in fragmented echo. He never really fit here anyway. Prepare for handoff. We're just keeping it warm. Only, they weren't spoken. They were played. Like an audio loop imitating speech. Slightly off. Slightly too slow. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into what I can only describe as a simulation chamber. The walls were matte black, with thin vertical seams glowing faint orange. In the center stood a chair, steel, with restraints, facing a series of curved screens. The screens were active, not with system data, with footage. My footage. Me walking the halls. Me eating in the galley. Me sleeping. Me watching Cooper. Every angle. Every moment I thought I'd been alone. All compiled and catalogued. Next to the chair there was a table. On it sat a file. Physical. That alone made my skin crawl. Who uses paper down here? I opened it. The contents were simple. A single sheet. My name, date of assignment, psych profile. At the bottom, a handwritten note in blue ink. Observer has reached contamination threshold. Clone activation authorized. Original scheduled for recycling. I stood there, waiting for the panic to hit. But it didn't. What I felt was worse. Validation. I'd known something like this was happening. The pieces had been assembling in the back of my skull for weeks. The only surprise was the clarity. The confirmation. I wasn't imagining it. I was being replaced. And I think it already happened. Because when I returned to my cabin, hours later, or maybe only minutes, I can't tell anymore, there was someone sitting on my bunk, wearing my uniform, reading my notebook. Same haircut, same posture, but not me. His face didn't react when I stepped inside. He just looked up, blinked, and said, "You're early." I didn't answer. He stood up slowly, set the notebook down with careful precision, and walked past me without another word. No confrontation, no threat, just resignation, like a substitute teacher seeing the real teacher return too soon. I turned, ready to follow. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I haven't seen him since. but everyone else has stopped calling me Elliot. They avoid using names now. I asked Kershaw what time the next supply chopper was coming. He tilted his head and said, "Don't worry. Replacement shipments are always on time." Replacement. Shipments. I'm being phased out. And the worst part? I don't know if the thing that took my place is better at being me than I ever was. It eats. It speaks. It nods in the right meetings. It doesn't question. It doesn't wander into red sectors. It plays along. Smoothly. Perfectly. And no one notices. Because maybe they were replaced first. Maybe the entire platform is manned by versions of people who never returned from the stairs. Maybe that's what keeping it warm really means. Sustaining the illusion until the true audience arrives. Or until the last original forgets how he got here. I'm writing this now with no expectation of survival. But not because I fear death. Because I fear obsolescence. Because one day I'll wake up and forget which version I am. And maybe that's already happened. Maybe this note is just another part of the loop. Maybe I wrote this before. Maybe he did. I should have kept walking. That was the thought looping in my head when I woke up this morning, if it was morning. Time has started to behave strangely. My watch reads the same as the central system clock, but both are wrong. They say it's Wednesday. I'm certain it was Friday yesterday. I remember that because Friday was the day I found the staircase, the day I descended. But I also remember going to the galley last night, and Carlson saying, "Happy Monday." I laughed at him. He didn't laugh back. He looked at me like I just walked into the room wearing someone else's skin. It's not just the calendar. I've started noticing moments repeat themselves. Not exactly. Just subtly. A phrase spoken the same way. A dropped spoon clattering the same rhythm. Someone blinking too slowly like they've seen this conversation already, and are simply playing it back. Kershaw offered me a cup of coffee and said, "Don't fall asleep standing." That would have been normal, except he said the exact same words 2 days ago, in the exact same tone, while handing me the same mug. I remember the chip on its handle. I remember because I cut my lip on it, and when I did this morning, the cut reopened in the same spot. That's when I realized we're not just being watched, we're being rerun. There's a loop beneath us. I don't mean physically below. I mean conceptually, like a structure of time and perception that exists just beneath the surface of what we think is real. The platform is part of it, but not the core. The structure feeds on the idea of recurrence, of familiarity turned against you. Every corridor has started to feel shorter. Every room more confined. The walls aren't moving. I am. I found an old report while sweeping the auxiliary comms center. An actual printed report. Yellowed. Folded into a maintenance manual. It was a psychological briefing on loop exposure syndrome. Authored by someone named Dr. Lorne A. Halbrecht. The top was redacted, but the text describes something eerily familiar. Subjects embedded in reality folds exhibit progressive temporal dissonance, marked by momentary déjà vu, then full dissociation. Eventually, subjects forget original entry points and normalize environmental anomalies. Final phase involves psychological entanglement with their own replacements. Final line. Most do not survive the overlap. I didn't understand what overlap meant until I opened the south maintenance hatch and saw myself walking toward me. I froze. So did he. We stood maybe 10 feet apart, both gripping the same rusted handle. Same expression of disbelief twisted slightly differently. I looked older. Or maybe he did. One of us blinked too fast, the other too slow. His right hand was trembling. Mine wasn't. We didn't speak. We just mirrored. I lifted my hand. He didn't. That's when I realized it wasn't a mirror. We weren't mirrors. We were out of sync. I stepped forward. He stepped back. I asked, "How long?" He answered, "Too long." And then he was gone. Not walked away. Just gone, like a glitch in footage, cut mid-frame. 1 second there, the next, nothing. The hatch behind him was closed. Locked from the inside. I turned, expecting to see someone watching. No one. Just the buzz of overhead lights and the dripping silence of oil-wet steel. Later in the galley, I heard Cooper humming. He never hums. I asked him what day it was. He said Tuesday with a smirk. But I already heard someone call it Sunday 2 hours earlier. The windows were dark. The clock read 19 Heo. But the outside floodlights were casting long morning shadows. Time isn't broken. It's decoupled. Something down here is pulling the platform into its own sequence of events. Not linearly. Like a vinyl loop stretched thin and replayed out of order. Some days you wake up after the day you died. Some days you meet yourself before you arrived. Some days, like today, you remember something you haven't done yet. There was a dream last night. Or maybe last week. I was standing on the helipad, watching the ocean churn in reverse, waves falling upward. The wind blew toward the center of the platform, sucked inward like a lung inhaling steel. The central derrick spun counterclockwise, and the clouds circled like vultures. I looked down and saw 5 shadows behind me. I was alone. But the shadows moved when I didn't. They took steps forward while I stood still. I woke up holding someone else's boots. They were mine. Same size, same wear patterns, but laced differently. I never tie the top eyelets. These were tight. My handwriting is changing too. My field notes are still legible, but they curve differently. Letters slope left now, and I used to slant them right. I caught myself writing my name as Elliot S., but my full name is Elliot M. Spence. I don't have a middle name starting with S. Unless I do now. Unless this is the wrong version. I haven't told anyone. I've stopped trying. I'm not sure who's original anymore. There's a concept I can't shake. What if we were all meant to replace someone else? Not as punishment, not as accident, but as design. What if the platform creates new patterns by breaking the old ones? What if it's not a loop at all, but a spiral? Each cycle almost the same, but slightly off, so that the system can study the variations. How long does it take for the subject to realize? How many inconsistencies until collapse? What happens when 2 iterations converge? I think I'm being merged. I've found clothes in my locker that don't fit, photographs in my bunk drawer that I don't remember taking, a note that reads, "Don't let them synchronize you," written in my own hand, but with a signature that reads, Spencer E., instead of Elliot Spence. Today I shaved my face and noticed a scar under my jawline. I've never had that scar, but I remember how I got it now. I remember the pain, the blade slipping, the blood on the sink. I remember cleaning it up. I remember a memory that isn't mine, locking itself into place. The loop isn't a cage. It's a crucible, and I'm not surviving it. I'm being rewritten by it. I awoke beneath the stairwell in Corridor 3C, face pressed against the grating, palms bloodied with rust flakes that had embedded into the creases of my hands. I hadn't slept there. I hadn't even walked that corridor in over a day, or at least I thought I hadn't. The clipboard beside me was mine. My name was printed across the header of the inspection sheet, but the handwriting filling it out wasn't. It looked like mine if I wrote with my left hand during a seizure. Half the entries were nonsense. Vent chamber irregularity. Breathes when unattended. Confirmed by mirror drip. One line simply read, Version 6B reactive. Mirrors may lie. I don't know what any of that means. But someone with my name and my access was here before me, or still is. It wasn't the first note I found. Back in the auxiliary bunk room, technically off limits but never enforced, I found a sketchbook under one of the unused mattresses. Every page was filled with drawings of the platform, detailed, obsessive, floor by floor, duct by duct. The same layout each time but with slight differences. In one, the stairwells were reversed. In another, the galley had no door. One version had the observation tower upside down, buried beneath the sea. The final pages showed nothing but shapes, spirals, fractals, mirrored corridors bleeding into each other, tunnels converging and diverging like veins. On the inside cover, Spence, iteration, null 5, map to self. I've started marking myself, small cuts near the knuckles, scratches behind the ear. Subtle, but distinct. A system of identifiers, just in case I encounter myself again. I thought it would help me keep track of which version I am. It hasn't. I've already found 2 more with identical marks. Either they're copying me, or I'm copying them without knowing it. This isn't identity loss. This is identity saturation. Every version of me that's ever stepped foot on this platform has begun to converge. I've found logs from previous rotations. Classified ones. Archived under false labels in the central server. Names like E. M. Spencer, Elliot Mann, Spence, E. Max, M. Spen. All with similar biometric data. All with handwriting analysis scores above 90% match with mine. All with termination reports marked lost, not deceased. I'm not the first, but I think I might be the last. I tried to leave the platform. I know how that sounds. It's offshore. There's no way off without an evac chopper or ship transfer. But I tried anyway. Climbed down the lower maintenance ladder, 20 meters down the southern strut, toward the emergency raft casket. It was there, like always. But when I opened the casing, I found no raft. Just a folded blanket and a sealed envelope addressed to exit candidate. I opened it. It was blank. Not completely. Under a blacklight, one of the portable inspection pens, I found a single word etched faintly in block letters. Sink. I stayed there for a while, watching the sea. It didn't look real. The waves were too symmetrical. The motion was too slow. I dropped a bolt over the edge. It hovered before falling. It didn't splash. It just disappeared, like it had been erased. Back in the control center, I confronted Cooper. Not directly. I asked him about his transfer paperwork when he arrived. Who signed him in? He gave me the right answers. 2 right. Rehearsed. Recited. And then he blinked. 4 times in rapid succession, just like I've seen in the others. When I mentioned the word sink, his lips tightened. Just a twitch. But there. A glitch in the act. They're not just watching us. They're manufacturing us. I found a mirror behind panel 17B in the eastern ductway. Not a real mirror, a 2-way. There's no reason for it to be there. It faces nothing but wall and cables. But when I looked in, I didn't see myself. I saw someone else wearing my face. Not mimicking, inhabiting. He looked confused, like he didn't expect to see me. He touched his neck. I touched mine. Not mirrored, reversed. The more I stared, the more wrong it became. His eyes blinked out of sync. His lips moved when I didn't speak. When I did, he didn't respond. Then he smiled. Not friendly, triumphant. I smashed the glass. Blood sprayed. Not mine. Inside the panel, just behind the now shattered mirror, was a cavity filled with fluid, black and pulsing, like ink with a heartbeat. It retreated when exposed. Evaporated. Almost afraid. Inside was a note, sealed in plastic. Written in block lettering. You are the mirror now. I don't sleep anymore. Not because I'm afraid, though I am. But because I'm not sure which version of me wakes up each time. The dreams don't match. Some nights I see myself watching others sleep. Some nights I'm beneath the platform, walking endless metal hallways that twist like intestines. Other nights, I'm standing in front of a panel with a voice behind me saying, "Say the phrase." And I do. I always do. But I never remember what it is. Every part of the station now feels like a rehearsal, like we're repeating scenes for someone's benefit. Carlson has stopped making eye contact. Kershaw hasn't spoken in 2 days. Cooper smiles too often. The galley radio plays static now, but I can hear voices inside it. Reversed speech. Whispers of commands. One phrase repeats over and over. Reset initiated. Composite not yet stable. Composite. They're not watching for data. They're watching for synchronization. They want to see if one version of me can absorb the others. Like testing materials under stress, pressure, heat, until only one cohesive sample remains. A crucible. Not to burn away impurities. To create a singularity. I don't know if it's working. I feel more fractured than ever. But maybe that's the final step. The collapse before the merge. Maybe I've already merged. And this is the aftermath. Maybe the other versions were never real. Only projections from within. Ghosts of choices unmade. Paths unrealized. But then I found the tooth. It was on my bunk. Wrapped in gauze. Human. Molar. Root still bloodied. I opened my mouth. Counted. No gaps. I checked again. Still full. But I remember the pain now. A metallic crunch. A scream into cloth. A night I never lived. And in that memory, I was smiling when I pulled it out. Because I needed proof that I could change the outcome. This isn't paranoia anymore. This is confirmation. The crucible isn't coming. I'm already inside it. The day began without time. I no longer know when one ends and another begins. The clocks have stopped syncing with each other. My wristwatch says 02:17. The galley wall clock says 26:45. Cooper's monitor looped back to 00.00 3 times in the span of an hour. I know this because I've begun filming everything. Not for proof. I've long since accepted that there is no one left to prove anything to. The recording is for me, for some future moment when I might forget what I was, or when I became something else entirely. I play the footage back and fast forward, looking for stutters, for repeated gestures, loops, duplicated actions across separate feeds. I've started seeing them. More than once I watched myself enter a room on one screen, and simultaneously exit it on another. In one clip I'm sitting at the edge of the bed, head in hands. In another I'm watching myself from the hallway. The timestamp difference? 2 seconds. I remember neither. And yet, they feel true. I've stopped using pronouns in my notes. I doesn't mean anything anymore. It's diluted, contaminated. If there are multiple versions, the singular I cannot contain them. So I've reverted to initials. EMS, EMS1, EMS2, until I ran out of room on the page. There are too many overlaps. I found a scrawl on the side of a tool locker. One must survive. It was carved, not written. Deep gouges into the steel. Old, weathered. I ran my fingers across the grooves, feeling each letter like a scar. The meaning was clear. The experiment, whatever it is, only ends when one remains. I stopped eating the station food. The rations taste off, like they've been prepared for someone who doesn't metabolize like I do. Too much sodium. Unfamiliar texture. No expiration labels. Even the wrappers are generic. When I asked Kershaw where the new shipment came from, he just smiled and said, "From the other side." I laughed nervously. He didn't. That night, I found a package outside my cabin. A meal tray. No note. Just a napkin folded into a crude star shape. Inside the napkin was another tooth. Not mine. A canine this time. The root looked burnt. There are smells coming from the lower levels. Metallic, antiseptic, wet. I tried to trace the source, following the scent through the ventilation paths. It always leads to the same hatch. Maintenance Sector 9. Locked. Sealed with a code I don't have. But I've heard movement inside. Not machinery, not people. Synchronization, I thought. That word repeats everywhere. In my logs. In the ambient whispers that bleed through the static on the comms. Even in my dreams now. I heard a voice repeat it endlessly. Synchronize. 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 I woke up with blood in my ear. On day, redacted. I've stopped labeling them. I found something under my bunk. A mirror. Small, circular, old. I don't remember placing it there. But it was angled just so, reflecting the vent above my bed. I stared at it for a while, and what I saw wasn't a reflection. It was another room. Same layout, but slightly off. The wall panel had a dent mine doesn't. The sheets were tucked in tighter. And the man lying in the bunk wasn't moving. I tapped the glass. No response. I turned away, and when I looked again, the image was gone. Just my face staring back. Pale, hollow, mouth slightly open, like I was waiting to speak but forgot how. Later that day, or hour, I received a message through the internal alert system. That system hasn't worked in months. It came through anyway. A single phrase, blinking in red across the monitors. Proceed to the heart. No coordinates. No directions. But I knew. Everyone here knows. We pretend not to. But the message has lived in us for weeks. Maybe longer. The heart is beneath the platform. Deeper than schematics suggest. Past the flooded sectors. Through the sealed bulkheads. Into the structure that shouldn't exist, but does. I began the descent through Shaft 3E. The lower I went, the warmer the air became. Not heat like fire. Heat like breath. Like I was being exhaled upon by something ancient and alive. The walls changed. Metal became something else. Smooth, dark, neither wet nor dry. The bolts weren't bolts. The seams weren't welded. The corridor felt grown, not built. At the end of the shaft, I reached a chamber. Spherical. No lights, and yet everything was visible. In the center, a pillar. And at the base of the pillar, a chair. In the chair, me. He looked up when I entered, not startled, expectant. We studied each other. No hostility, no fear, just recognition. Like twins who grew up apart and finally reunited. He raised his hand. I raised mine. We mirrored each other perfectly. Until he tilted his head, and I didn't. I felt a jolt in my spine. He smiled. "You're early," he said. I couldn't speak. I didn't want to give him the advantage of my voice. He stood slowly, and the way he moved, it was like watching my own memories play out. The gait, the nervous hand twitch, the subtle lean on the right leg from the knee injury years ago. All correct, but colder. Calculated. "This is where we decide," he said. "Which version continues?" I didn't answer. My fists clenched involuntarily. He noticed, nodded. "You're not ready yet, but you will be. They're almost done compiling." I asked him finally, "Who are they?" He laughed, not cruel, just amused. "There is no they, not anymore. We've surpassed them. You're not the first to reach this point, but you might be the last, which makes you the most dangerous." He sat again, calm as ever. The heart needs coherence. One identity. One outcome. You know this. I backed away. He didn't follow. just watched. I ran, up the shaft, through the corridors, past familiar faces that didn't react. Everyone seemed frozen in position, like they were waiting for a cue, a signal that the final scene had begun. I locked myself in my cabin and stared at the mirror until my eyes bled. I saw him again. But this time, I wasn't sure which side of the glass I was on. That night, I dreamt of merging. Not dying, not killing, but fusing. My body stretched across timelines, overlapping decisions, absorbing pain, memory, error. I felt everything. Every version of me. The weak ones, the violent ones, the ones who gave in and the ones who ran. All of them converging into a single point of awareness. And in that convergence, I saw the heart again. Not as a place, but as a choice. And now I wait. The message will come again. Maybe in sound, maybe in blood, maybe through the next tooth I find wrapped in gauze beneath my sheets. When it does, I'll return, and I'll sit in the chair, and I'll decide. Because now, I understand. Singularity isn't an event. It's a decision no one else can make for you. The problem with reflection is that it assumes there's something on the other side. Some surface, some law of physics insisting that when light bounces, it must return truth. But reflections lie. Mirrors lie. Screens lie. Even the ocean reflects the sky above it while hiding what churns in its depths. And so, I began to distrust every image of myself. Not just the footage, or the mirror in the galley, but the very shape of my shadow, the way it hesitated half a beat behind my movement. I watched myself in the porthole reflection once, and saw my lips move out of sync with the words I spoke. There was no echo, just a lag, a stutter in presence. I spoke again. The voice that answered was my own, but lower, tired, as if stretched thin across miles of water and time. It simply said, "You're not driving anymore." That's when I understood. The interface had begun. The version of me in the chair, the one I left in the heart, he hadn't stayed behind. He'd moved, migrated. I had become the corridor through which he traveled, a passage carved in soft flesh and weaker thought. I stopped sleeping, not out of fear but futility. There was no rest to be had. Dreams had become staging grounds, rehearsal spaces for whatever consciousness had entered me. I stopped counting the days. The clocks were now mocking abstractions. I had more urgent tasks. I began to lose track of whose eyes I was seeing through. Sometimes I would blink and find myself standing in rooms I didn't remember walking into. One evening, or hour, I opened the maintenance hatch and realized I was already inside, staring at myself from the other side. I shut the hatch. It stayed shut, but I could still feel the presence behind it. Me, him, we. I don't know anymore. The crew, if they can still be called that, no longer acknowledges my presence. Kershaw wanders the platform with a wrench in his hand, muttering to the bolts as if they're confessing sins. Cooper hasn't spoken since the broadcast. He just sits near the engine room, sketching endless spirals into the steel with a bent nail. Dana, or what's left of her, is in hydroponics. She tends to plants that aren't there. Her hands move in perfect rhythm, cutting and trimming invisible stalks. I saw her mouth the word operator last night, over and over. A chant, almost. I asked her who the operator was. She didn't look up. She whispered, "The operator watches the watcher, until the watcher forgets he's being watched." I thought I was immune. Thought I had retained some shred of separation. But that illusion fractured 2 days ago. If days still have meaning. I received a transmission from the mainland. The voice was calm. Too calm. It said my contract had been extended. Your presence has proven crucial to containment integrity. I demanded clarification. There was none. The voice signed off with a code I recognized from years ago. Directive K-101. The self-monitoring loop. A psychological protocol used on compromised agents to assess recursive behavior. The voice wasn't from the mainland. It was from me. I checked the comm logs. The source was internal. Sub-level 12. That level doesn't exist. But I went anyway. The elevator wouldn't descend past level 9, so I took the emergency stairwell. After 300 steps, the numbers on the wall stopped counting up and began counting down. Negative floors. The walls turned black. Not painted black. Made of black. A matte nothingness that drank the light from my headlamp. I kept going until I reached a steel door, marked simply with the symbol I'd seen before. The overlapping triangles, spinning inward. A recursive vortex. Behind the door was a room with no furniture. No equipment, no power source. Just a chair. And on the walls, hundreds of small screens, each showing a different angle of the station, but not in real time. These were recordings, moments, possibilities. On one screen, I saw myself walking calmly down the dock to a rescue ship. On another, I was slumped against the wall, dead from a neck wound. On another still, I was seated in the heart, smiling as I dissolved into light. Every screen a forked road, a fragmented version of the same self. The operator sat in the chair. I recognized him immediately. Not from memory, but from density. He was heavier than the room. Reality bent slightly around the outline of his form. He wore my face, aged 30 years, but eyes replaced with flickering static. His mouth didn't move when he spoke. The voice came from behind me, and within me. "We are almost aligned," he said. "Only a few versions left to terminate. You are the most difficult. The one who observes. The one who resists the merge." I asked why. Why any of this? Why the platform, the loop, the descent? His voice flickered like bad signal. "You consented. You signed the clause. Page 17, subsection 4. Consciousness redundancy in exchange for debt clearance." I tried to deny it. Tried to scream. But my mouth was no longer mine. My body held still while my vision swam through multiple perspectives, as if each screen in the room had been absorbed into my optic nerve. I saw myself moving through the platform halls in 5 different directions. I saw myself die in 3. I saw myself speak to someone I couldn't see in 1. And I saw myself watching, all of them, on a screen just like this, writing notes that bled ink onto my hands. The operator stood, and the room darkened. Not because of light, but because of permission. The illusion of it had been rescinded. He placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt it in my stomach, in my throat, in my memory. A full overwrite. "This is not punishment," he said. "It is calibration." When I woke, I was back in my bunk. The mirror had cracked. One half showed my face. The other showed an empty bed. I have since found multiple notes written in my own handwriting that I don't remember writing. They are instructions. Don't trust the man in hydroponics. Break the loop on floor 3. When the time comes, disconnect the emitter. I don't know what the emitter is. Or maybe I do. Maybe I'm not meant to remember until it's time. I've taken to reading the notes aloud into the recorder. My own voice feels alien to me now. It wavers. It vibrates at a pitch just below human hearing. I hear something breathing through the vents. I don't think it's a person. I don't think it's waiting. It feels like it's timing something, pacing me, measuring the intervals between decisions, tracking which version I currently am. There are fewer now. I feel them falling away. The dreams have stopped looping. The memories are becoming sharper. I no longer see double when I look in the glass. But the question remains, if I am the operator now, then who is observing me? There are no windows on this level, though I'm certain the ocean is still out there, pressing its mass against the platform's rusted hull, eager to reclaim what we never had the right to build. I haven't left this room in what feels like days. Maybe more, maybe less. Time has collapsed into sensation. The rhythm of the coolant pumps, the hum of low-frequency tones through the metal flooring, the occasional flicker of motion in my peripheral vision that doesn't correspond to anything my brain can catalog. I used to keep a log of events. Now I keep a log of silences. The longer they stretch, the more I'm convinced that what remains of me is being measured not in thoughts, but in pauses between them. There's a terminal here, one I don't remember seeing before. It booted up on its own 2 hours ago, or 2 minutes. The screen glows with that sickly familiar green, lines of cascading code that don't match any system we were trained on. At first, I thought it was corrupted. Then I saw my name embedded between the syntax. Not just once, but repeatedly, buried in command strings like a worm in circuitry. Randall T. Mason, final variant pending. Then, beneath that, a line of text that shifts and rearranges each time I look away. Calibration near complete. You may exit when ready. I don't know what exit means anymore. There is no hatch, no door, no escape pod. The only path leads downward, into the central shaft of the platform, where the mechanical heartbeat of this whole place pulses, with a rhythm that mimics breath, but has no lungs to fuel it. I've been there. I remember the wet clang of metal stairs under my boots, the way condensation dripped like sweat from the walls, and the moment I realized the pipes weren't pipes, but veins. The heart is alive. It was never machinery. We grafted onto something ancient, and it led us, because it needed a shape to wear. We gave it one. Then we forgot that we'd never built this place from scratch. We'd only finished the sentence. They call it Deep Station Delta in the logs. But that's not its name. That's a designation. Its name, if it can be said to have one, isn't in any language we speak. It's a pressure, a frequency, a request that bypasses the auditory canal and settles directly into the nervous system. I first heard it the night I broke the mirror in my cabin. As I picked the shards from my palm, I heard it whisper through the blood. 3 tones, descending, like sonar pinging from beneath the bedrock of cognition. I thought I'd gone mad. But madness implies deviation from reality. What if reality itself is the deviation? What if this platform, this experiment, this illusion of control we've clung to for 43 cycles, is just a shell around something older that's trying to correct us? The others are gone now. Kershaw, Cooper, Dana. Their patterns have collapsed. I haven't seen them in days. Their belongings remain, undisturbed. But their voices, those still linger in the air ducts and inside the static between camera feeds. I hear them repeat key phrases, words I thought had meaning, now stripped of context. Dana's voice loops most frequently. The observer isn't safe once it observes itself. Over and over. I muted the feed once. The audio still played. I powered down the system. It kept going. The signal isn't coming from the cameras. I know now that I am the last. Not because I survived, but because I remained unmerged long enough to recognize the process. That was my purpose. Not to operate, not to observe, but to fragment, to serve as the final test case before interface completion. They needed to know if the identity could endure full internal recursion, if the subject could maintain cohesion once all other versions had been assimilated. I failed, or maybe I succeeded. The system is unclear about what outcome constitutes success. All I know is that I can feel them inside me now. The others, the variants. Each one a fracture, each one a scream frozen in amber and embedded somewhere behind the eyes. I remember walking into the engine bay. I remember drowning in the tank room. I remember peeling my own skin off to search for wires that weren't there. I remember being calm and cold and kind, and watching a crewmate beg for help as I shut the door and pressed record. All of them me. All of them still present. None of them fully in control. Last night I heard a knock on the wall. Not a sound. A knock. Physical. Rhythmic. It came from the inside of the bulkhead near the hydraulic system. I pressed my ear against the panel and heard breathing. My breathing, but reversed, like tape rewinding. I don't know how long I stood there. When I pulled away, a symbol had been burned into the metal. The same recursive triangle I saw below the sublevels. The mark of calibration. I no longer use my name. It feels like a misdirection, a distraction. The platform addresses me differently now. When I log in to any terminal, it reads primary witness. I've stopped correcting it. Perhaps that's what I've become. Not the actor, not the survivor. Just the last eye in the sky before the lights go out. There's a protocol I've never dared activate. Buried in the base code, hidden under layers of legacy software no one but the original designers would know. It's called Ouroboros. I found it by accident, typing nonsense commands during a fevered breakdown. It shouldn't exist. When I executed a dry run, the terminal asked, "Are you certain the loop should end?" I don't know the answer to that question. I only know that I'm tired. Not just in the bones, but in the mind. In the pattern of thought that keeps reconstructing this false platform in my dreams. I'm tired of waking up in the same room with slightly different shadows. I'm tired of doors that lead back to themselves. I'm tired of the breathing. Most of all, I'm tired of being watched. So I sat down at the central terminal. I input my credentials, though it no longer required them. The system greeted me as Final Instance. A single command line blinked, awaiting the final input. My hands hovered for what felt like a lifetime. And then I typed, Ouroboros, engage. The screen went black. Nothing happened. I waited. Then, in the silence, I heard the knock again. But this time, it was from above.